We'll get started in another minute. Folks are streaming in here, and I guess we'll speak for about 1 hour. And so those of you who are tuned in already, hi, thank you. Our title is borrowed from one of my, I think, our heroes. Rich, I got an email from Ronald Heifetz this morning.
Really?
Yeah, a professor at the Kennedy School, and really like a legendary person who more or less created, I think, one of the core themes in the study of leadership in the academic sense. Back in the 70s and 80s, he started running this seminar on leadership, and a bunch of books came out of that. And he's been really quite influential to me. He was on my podcast like 6 or 8 months ago. And Rich, I know that you've studied his stuff quite a bit too. And his email was, "Hey, I see the title of your talk today is drawn from my first book." To which I said, yes, much respect. We are indeed drawing from your book called Leadership Without Easy Answers. So thanks for being here with me, Rich. I know it's kind of your job, right? I mean, we work together, so you're not like an invited guest from the world outside, but this wasn't just me inviting you. It was kind of your idea, huh?
Yeah, I'm excited. I think that it's really, really neat to be able to talk to a broader audience, because the truth is, with all the chaos going on and all the change going on, suddenly people are beginning to say, what's the leadership input into it? It's begun to move this topic that you and I talk about frequently towards the forefront.
Yeah, so we're going to get into it, but let's find out who you are for a couple minutes. You seem just like a standard issue white guy from America, maybe Texas, judging from your subtle way of talking. But who are we talking to, Rich?
Well, thank you. By the way, everybody listening, Amol is cheating. He knows that I am from Texas. Now, the operational term is from, I haven't lived in Texas in 40 years. I probably come from a slightly different background, actually, from the average person who's out there doing leadership development, executive development for companies. I actually
That's an intriguing moment right there. Musa, did Rich freeze on you too?
Yeah, let's...
Well, I'm sure he'll be back soon. I mean, Rich does have a varied history, but I'll say where he's at now. I mean, he joined our company about a year ago, and the idea was make me better and make our various leaders better at what they do. And that's what we've been doing over this last year. And we've gotten into a lot of topics. I mean, you could say that No-Tel's business was already getting pretty tricky a year ago. We do this flexible workplace platform all around the world. And last summer, it may be a vague memory for you and a long time off, but there were all these troubles with this other company that does co-working and flexible stuff. And as those guys were sort of catching fire and turning into real shambles, it was putting a lot of stress on us. And we were trying to navigate the clarity of distinction between the two, and how are we different, and how could we prove that, and how would the performance of our business go over time. And so that was the moment when Rich showed up. But that seems like a cakewalk compared to these last few months. And really, these last few months, we'll get into what all's been going down and what all that leadership stuff means for us. But part of the reason we thought it might be a good idea to get us together and talk about this is these last few months, we've hosted a number of conversations that we've shared, focused mostly on the workplace itself. I think the issues of work from home that we published and shared some best practices, planning the return to work, how to do it safely, how are big real estate heads from around the world thinking about it, whether it's the head of Uber's real estate or Dropbox, what's going to change, what are predictions people are making, how's all that stuff going to evolve. So we've been sharing a lot about that, but what we didn't yet get into is some of our thinking about the people themselves that are in those spaces and how they're going to have to operate. And today's conversation is going to be our first one on that, and hopefully one we have your interest and permission to pursue a little bit more. If we ever get started, I know we're just doing a little drum roll here while the internet in Seattle gets sorted out for Dr. Vincent. But Rich came to us, I think after, I don't know, 35 years or so. Early on, he was in the military with the Air Force intelligence, and he worked for the famous General Schwarzkopf during Gulf War I back in 1991. And since then has spent time with Microsoft, working for the guy who's the CEO now, Satya, and with Amazon, working for the founder, Bezos, and a couple of other startups along the way. And I guess there are lots of war stories and experiences that I'd love to tap into from Rich when we get to him. So that's his sort of arc on getting here. But Musa, maybe you can help me out and figure out where we're at with Rich. Have you gotten any messages from him?
Yeah, we're slacking. Give us another minute or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then maybe we want to clean up the screen a bit. Let's see who else we have here. So another word or two as we're warming up for him. So the title of the book that we drew from for our conversation here is Leadership Without Easy Answers. And Heifetz wrote this book, I guess it's in the 80s, and I came across it maybe 10 years ago. And I think it's one of the most influential sources for me. It had a really big impact on how I think about what's going on. And I suppose there's two parts to that title, and they both bear a little bit of analysis. So the first one is leadership. And I think in my email that invited many of you today, as we're dealing with the world that we look at, a lot of us feel like readers, not leaders. You know, we're reading the newspaper, maybe we're watching TV, and we just have no idea and no purchase on what we can do to change anything. And, you know, there might be another kind of role that folks have from time to time. Hey, Rich, I'm just catching people up on one way I think about that title that we borrowed and the word leadership. I mean, if you're a reader and you feel like you've got no power, okay, well, if you're a manager and you've got a little bit of authority and some scope to operate in, okay, there's that. Well, there is another job that's even harder and a little bit different, which is the job of leadership. And I think that doesn't just happen in companies or in front of militaries. It can happen in the household or in a hospital or in a friendship. So that's one part of it, leadership. The other part of that title is without easy answers. And because sometimes, I mean, the point is that sometimes there are. And those are awfully nice problems to have when, you know, the answer is do surgery, remove this thing, or just make a spreadsheet and figure out how these things compute together. But these times, these last few months especially, and perhaps for each of us all the time, depending on what's going on, there are these moments when we don't have easy answers. Like, what do you do when you're just getting warmed up on Rich and he's about to tell you he's not really from Texas, but he spent the last 30 years doing blah, blah, blah. I told him you were in the military and in the Gulf War and worked for Satya and worked for Bezos. But do you want to do your own treatment on that, Rich?
Well, thank you. And actually, I was monitoring you the whole time, Amol. This was a test of your agility, and I want you to know that you so far you're doing very well.
This wasn't supposed to be. This is for their benefit, not mine. Why are you testing me with?
Well, everything's come on. Everything's a test. Why not dual track? So as Amol has probably told you, I actually began the first 8 years of my career as a combat training officer in the U.S. military. And obviously, when I decided to ply my trade in the civilian sector, that translated to management, business strategy, executive training and development. And it's been extraordinary because I was very, very benefited back in the 80s when I started my military career, because really only in the service was there this very crisp distinction between what leadership is and what management is. And the military prized both. You know, there is this hierarchical structure. There is a lot of order. There's a great deal of desire for predictability. So it's a tightly managed organization. But that's not really the way that the military deploys when they're on an engagement. That tends to be organized, kind of team-based, and they tend to be very much led.
So that's like, you know, to me and probably most people, like, what are you talking about? I thought it's all so regimented and crisp salutes and whatnot. But I guess your point is, actually, that's just what you see. What you can't see is it's not like that.
Yeah, it's not like that at all. And the model is that you want predictability and order, and that is kind of, the daily peacetime way that it operates. But when you're looking for something that's really going to be in a volatile or an uncertain or a complex or an ambiguous environment where you really need high commitment, that's a function of leadership. And that distinction is very clear in the military. How do you conduct yourself in a way that inspires committed performance in an ambiguous or changing situation?
Okay, I mean, I don't want to overdo the military thing, and in fact, I want to create some space from it, but it is sort of a origin point for where you learned a lot of this, and where I think probably if there is a human institution that has spent the most time on how do you organize a ragtag band and turn them into a thing that can really deliver, I think much of that work has been done in the military over hundreds of years, and so it is a really valuable place to draw on. But I guess then you went to business, and do you want to burnish your credentials a little further with all the fancy people that you've been hanging out with?
Yeah, I'll burnish my credentials a little bit. I went to Nestle for 15 years, and Nestle in the United States is thought of very much as a chocolate company, but in fact, they're the world's largest food company, by far the largest. There are a number of household brands from Stouffer's to Purina to Perrier that are actually all Nestle brands. So it was a great exposure to kind of the consumer packaged goods. And eventually I became their head of leader development worldwide. So I was based in Switzerland, and Nestle is huge, 300,000 employees. It was an incredible exercise and practice of complexity and scale. After Nestle, I was recruited and went over to Amazon. Amazon, I was there for 4 years. And in that relatively short spell of 4 years, Amazon went from still very much thinking of themselves as a relatively new startup of 8,000 employees. Wasn't sure what they meant by that. That seemed like a pretty big startup, but only 4 years later, Amazon had gone from 8,000 employees to 130,000 employees. So if I thought I'd had a workout with complexity before, I had seen nothing yet. It was extraordinary growth, almost frenetic. And it was a chance to really see leaders operate under an environment that was not only changing in complexity very quick, but the sheer brunt force of scale. It was not unusual, Amol, if you had started at Amazon as a manager with 4 people, by the next year you had 40, by the next year you had 400. And so it really kind of was an extraordinary exercise, but it was also kind of a laboratory where we were figuring out how to make that operate. Then I went briefly over to Microsoft after that, which was similar, but Microsoft was 40 years old by then. They were kind of a grandfather in the technology industry, and I got other facets of experience there.
Anything as crazy as these last 6 months in your career? Can you give me? I mean, they have just stacked up the virus, the economic disaster, the second wave of the virus now, at least in the US, the uprisings in the streets, not just here, but around the world. And who knows what's next? I mean, at this point, I think we only have 11 hours left in Q2 2020, but we might find ourselves with another one. Have you ever seen anything like this?
Well, no. Back to you, Amol. No. That's extraordinary. I mean, we use this term a lot, and I apologize, but it is a kind of perfect storm, right? I mean, we're being hit on the social front with unrest and agitation for a bit of long-standing injustices. We've got this incredible economic, downturn that came very, very suddenly on the heels of what in many countries was a pretty bullish market. And then we've got this pandemic. I mean, the truth is, we may have looked back at our great grandparents and thought, you know, the Spanish flu of 1918, what a traumatic experience. And given that we're facing three of these crises at once, I think 1918 probably has nothing on us. And years from now, you know, your grandchildren will say, "What was it like to live through, you know, the explosive 2020s?" I do think, though, that in some ways this raises the threshold for us. Leaders that navigate this are going to be, you know, ruffled by nothing as we go down the road. Everything as a leadership challenge will seem tame by comparison as we tumble into the future.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah. Oh my God. I thought I had seen it all. I mean, 9/11, 2008, but yeah. Yeah. Actually, by the time the uprising started flowing through the blood of our people and the incredible emotional distress that created, especially among our staff in the US, I mean, I'd already spent the last 3 months dealing with just absolute disaster, personal safety, deaths in the family, layoffs, revenue going wild in every different direction. Yeah, I mean, there's merit to what you say, but I mean, the situation of leader, let's talk about it, right? So if somebody tuned in here, they didn't tune in to just hear us say like, oh man, this is crazy. It's, and I think your first point should be remembered, that if you are getting through this, you're coming out of this thing with far greater resources and more confidence, I hope, than you ever had. But what's the job? So what's the job? The world is caving in. You know, the walls are falling. That was the moment, right? March 20th or something. It was like that. We came to the office the day after the video of George Floyd had gone around, and you know, people were in tears. Like, what is the job first?
Well, the job first and foremost is that when people are facing uncertainty or volatility, they look to their leaders. And they look to their leaders for some very specific things. One is they're looking to their leaders and they're trying to have their leaders help define or clarify what it means, whatever the it is, in quotation marks. You know, this horrific video of George Floyd, this news that the pandemic is heading more away, whatever the wave is, people are looking for definition and clarification. And primarily it's the leader's job to provide that meaning or to explain that context. But ultimately, leaders are there to provide direction out of the it. Whatever.
Oh, hang on a second. I mean, just to process what's going on, I mean, that's insane. You expect us show up, it's Monday, 10 a.m., and it's just on, and this is the moment where you organize the problem frame and point a direction?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things that have to happen first. First of all, as a leader, you have to have credibility. And if you're waiting till the day of, you know, explosive uncertainty, you've waited too late. In other words, you need to have this kind of credibility that comes from what I call trust, the currency of leadership. So you've been building trust and you've been enrolling people in the fact that you're committed to them and you're committed to their future for a while. And then what happens if you have this trust, then you're able to begin to define some understand what's going on and what might be a viable path forward.
Well, what about I don't know? I mean, is that an answer? I mean, we look some of the clowns who run the US anyway, you never hear them say that. And sometimes I feel that's the only true answer.
Well, I think it is. And if you're thinking about people trying to weigh your soul against this trust measure, you've got to be absolutely transparent. I mean, I would be a little bit leery of a leader today who was not starting whatever he or she was saying with the words, I don't know. Now, that is not the same as saying, and I'm hopeless and I have no confidence in our ability to figure it out. That's
yeah, how truthful can you be, right, Rich? I mean, there have been moments when I was terrified. Not only was I terrified, I didn't know how much worse it could get, and I didn't know what we should do, and I didn't know if we'd make it. I didn't know if I was the person that could, if anyone could. So, transparency?
Yes. And the reason why I say yes to transparency is because ultimately people are going to try to look at three things. One is, are you being honest? Meaning you'll tell me straight. The second one is, are you smart enough that you can read what's going on? And that transparency gives me a read on that. And then, are you capable as a leader? I think one of the big, if I was going to top the list of the ways that you might try to navigate this uncertainty that would be almost your death sentence, the first thing I would put on that list is generally out of a benevolent intent, become paternalistic, and so you practice protecting your people by being opaque in some way. People have a great personal sense of whether somebody's being straight or honest or transparent. And the moment they detect, even though it comes from benevolent intent, that you're being opaque, then they begin to look for information other places. They begin to look for other trails to pursue. It's very, very important also on another front. Opaqueness is almost always caused by this desire to be, forgive the term, but paternalistic, to be protected. I don't think my people can handle this. I don't want to become a source of undue stress. It is fundamentally incongruent to act paternalistic and then expect your people to act like anything but children, right? I mean, and you see this all the time. I'm not giving people full information. I'm protecting them. I don't think they can handle this. And then out of the other side of my mouth, I criticize the fact that they're not rising to the challenge like fully formed adults. If you step back and look at it the way we are right now, you see that that's that's incongruent, which is the nicest thing I can say about it.
Well, you got to tell the truth. Okay. And I suppose a level of vulnerability, perhaps maximum vulnerability, and I saw a comment from one of my friends who's watching on this, is fine. But the job you're there to do is not just tell the truth and let the walls cave in, right? I mean,
yeah, I think you're right. I mean, maximum vulnerability, I suppose, is if we're sitting in a movie theater, I scream fire and I, become as panicked and lead the chaos with everybody else. But just because I triggered the stampede doesn't mean I'm leading. So one of the things that you've got to understand is, what is the mechanism by which people move forward and take on what needs to be taken on, work the work, in spite of the fact that they're facing ambiguity, or they're afraid, or they're uncertain.
Like, you're gonna have to be able to keep folks together. If the vulnerability thread leads you to a spot of freaking out, you're probably just as dead as if you were a liar.
I think so. I mean, think about the equation. First of all, I want to believe you're being honest. I need to know that this is your authentic self, and there's your vulnerability. But I also want to know, as a leader, when I make this choice to go down the trail with you, are you capable? Are you competent? And if you're running around screaming with the rest of the panicked masses, you fell that side of the equation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's within your power, even if you don't have the answers, it is your power to be in the game, to have your head in the game, to be cool enough that you will try to make a plan, you will try to gather some information. I don't know what the outcome will be, but I know I'm going to be here and I'm going to try my best to figure it out. If anyone can, it'll be us. Something like that.
Well, uncertainty, as it maximizes, and I would say we're in a world right now where uncertainty is maximized. You're not going to try to sell an answer. You quoted, you talked about Heifetz earlier. Heifetz had this model where he said there are these technical challenges and there are adaptive challenges. And technical challenges are you and me going through pretty much our business as usual. They're within the framework of the kinds of things we've pursued. It may not be an exact playbook, but it's pretty close to that. And so there's an exact answer. And so it's okay to have an expertise there. Adaptive challenges are very different. Adaptive challenges are where you've got to find a new way, not just to have the answer, but how to get to the answer. So it's very, very unlikely that you're going to get to the right answer or promote loyalty by saying, here's what we should do. Listen, If you're operating with certainty right now, like you've got some incredible clairvoyant skill, your people are not going to begin to love and follow you. They're going to begin to doubt you. They
Like even
realize,
if you knew the truth, like, hey, believe me, I know the truth. It's just unbelievable. Yeah.
yeah, it's not something that inspires confidence and inspires wouldn't you be doubtful if somebody came in and tried to pronounce to you what the way to go forward is? So
Yeah.
the leader becomes in this kind of chaos, if you will, the leader becomes the purveyor of a robust system, a robust approach. Meaning, my enrollment of you might be, there's a lot of uncertainty today. I know it's unnerving. I face my moments of doubt myself, but I am firmly convinced that together we're going to navigate this and we're going to come out the other side stronger. Okay, so there's my enrollment. Now, suggesting a robust plan is together, maybe even I convey by which specific vehicles, we're going to resolve what we believe are the key factors we have to consider, and we are going to chart a course together in almost a kind of co-creation. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to crowdsource the plan. And there's nobody making the decision to follow you that believes all the elements of a proposed solution have to be bolted together like a Frankenstein's monster. But they do have to believe that you recognize with humility that this has not been seen before. And they do have to believe that you're willing to hear, at least respectfully, a number of sources of intelligence and a number of point of views that might be the right solution. And so it's really about saying, I have confidence that together is a better chance for success than everybody running around screaming in the burning theater. And we're going to pull together to craft the way forward.
All right. So you're there. You don't have all the answers, but you're going to invite participation to get there. An adaptive problem, just sticking with Heifetz here, can be a crisis. And there are kinder and gentler versions of adaptive problems, but you know, an adaptive problem, I guess, there isn't some straightforward recipe. It's not, you know, have the surgeon just take out the tumor. It's just deal with the fact that your life's going to be a little shorter now, and you're going to have to figure out how to adapt to that. It's a very difficult kind of problem. But a crisis is a special case of that, right? I mean, existential threats abound in a moment like that. You know, will we even get through this? Will it even be, is there any point in a world that's just pervaded by horrible acts of violence against racial minorities, whatever, you know, like it just makes you wonder whether anything's worthwhile or whether you'll even survive. A crisis is a very intense form of adaptation. And I suppose like the playbook from Heifetz on this that I was thinking of, and we don't have to name check Heifetz all day, but I do love the guy, is to use a bit of language that we've seen the American president overplay, I think, these last few weeks. The idea that without protection and order for your people, like no work can be done. And I think you were gesturing at that a little bit. I mean, if you scream fire in the theater and everyone's panicking, there is no order, there is no system, how will we fix these problems, right? Just the fire being there is not a way to fix anything. So you do need to provide some kind of container in which people can operate coolly and systematically. Yeah? I mean, is that the first thing after you've established yourself as the partner for your people there?
Listen, that's a given. That is exactly right. But it's only half of what's needed. And that's the shame in that. Of course, we're going to have order, protection, predictability. There is no successful action that leverages all of us or gets us all to the other side without some parts of this that are well ordered and well protected. And that's wonderful. But your people need more than a predictable system or order in which to operate. These are stressful times. Your people need encouragement. So for instance, if you build a machine that provides order and protection, that's great. But that doesn't mean that anybody's going to avail themselves of it. And it's not unusual that people in times of crisis, particularly those that have this kind of belief in you can manage your way out of anything, including managing your way out of a leadership crisis, which I think you can tell by the way I said that, that's not really plausible. There's got to be a why. And let me give you an example of the encouraging source of purpose, of cause. There is a lot of talk these days about resilience. And I think it overlaps with what we're saying. What keeps you going? So in a protected environment, what am I doing and why do I continue to persevere? I'll be honest, and I'm not pointing fingers or naming names, but a lot of what goes into people's coaching and consulting around resilience has to do with making your place a nice place. It's kind of like the softer side of protection, right? You're protected, and oh, by the way, it's lovely, it's fun. This is a pejorative term, but people are coddled. There is no model
like
that suggests
like take a breather, take a day off, let's do a meditation together. I mean, you're not insulting these practices, but I guess what you're saying is they fall in the category of like, hey, you'll be okay, look after your mental health, you know, no one's coming to get you. But it's not the opposite, which is why are we doing it?
That's right. And in this regard, Amol, it's more like I can give you the basics of protection, right? It is kind of, yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. The truth is, the way that you get resilience, the way that you get people to continue on, the way that you get people encouraged to push on, even though they're afraid, is you clarify purpose. Think about your own life. When you were facing long odds, when you were facing high risk, when there was that nagging uncertainty in the back of your mind, you didn't necessarily push forward into that uncertainty because you were being coddled, because you're being rewarded, because you were getting that kind of treatment. You pushed on because you really believed. You believed in what you could achieve. You believed in that cause. So the fact is, resilience is different than the kinds of things people are talking about. And the kinds of things people are talking about are more hygienic, like a safe environment.
Okay, I mean, it's a high-minded way of putting it. Mine is sort of more basic. I've been trying to improve my my mile. I've been running a little longer and a little faster. And when I'm tracking my pace, there isn't ever a moment when I think I'm going to fall over dead. Like my safety is just like there. But really the only reason I push at all is because I'm trying to get to that next thing, that goal, I suppose. And I guess if you get it back into that high-minded mode, that's why people work harder, push through, overcome adversity, face up to some fears and anxieties, regardless of however well they're taken care of on the protection side. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would suggest that a big part of that is that goal is personally meaningful to you. I assume when you're out running your mile, you're not hoping that some people at the end of your mile are going to be waiting there to surprise you with cheers and glee.
Right. It's not an external motivation. So I guess it's not somebody else's approval. And I suppose your point is that's true for your people as well. A couple of attaboys like, hey, I appreciate you. You're a lovely person. That's not getting at their intrinsic drives, is it?
It's not getting at it, and it can cloud that intrinsic point of view. There was a survey done 2018 by Tiny Pulse, the people who do the pulse surveys. And they polled 200,000 people. So the sample size on this was tremendous. And they asked, why do you push on? Why do you go the extra mile? Why do you keep pursuing excellence? And the first thing that was listed, by far number one, was this intrinsic sense of purpose, this personal desire. And number two, by the way, was team spirit, not wanting to let my teammates down. So if you now think that the way you're going to manage people's keeping on-idness is by singling individuals out, in effect separating them from their team for extrinsic rewards, you're doing
like a raise or something. Yeah. So whether in ordinary times or crisis times, this principle is, and you know, the metaphor of wartime is powerful, right? It's like we need to protect our country. It's not about this next 100 yards. It is a very deep thing that we all have great commitments to. and it's this crew, we got to do it together. I don't need to get a medal. I hope I don't get one, because if I did, it means a bunch of us probably lost our lives, right? I mean, this is your way of thinking about it, but it is very contrary to the way people run and organize teams in many settings, right?
It's almost the opposite. And let's just admit that. But the truth is, when you go, you brought the wartime metaphor, so don't blame me for dragging this back to me telling old war stories. When you look at it, duress-filled circumstance, like say you're in a military engagement, you will find the same factors at play. A major motivator for people, besides their individual intrinsic sense of purpose, whatever that notion is that you named, for instance, patriotism, a major motive is we're in this together. We are reliant on each other. I mean, the joke, not joke explanation of Semper Fi for the Marine Corps says always faithful, but it really just means to each other. We can always count on each other. And so you've got to begin to communicate with your organization that says we are all in this together. We are going to attack this as a team. You do not want to single out individuals and split them off. That undermines the enrollment in we. And you do not want to make people believe that they're doing it for a medal or a trinket or a title or anything else that is bestowed upon them extrinsically. It is because it matters. You organize a committed team to do something that genuinely matters to them. They will move heaven and earth. That's the way you navigate this.
So let's come back and just pull that word purpose up again. We sort of left that word, 5 or 10 minutes ago, but all this talk of intrinsic motivations, that's what purpose is about, right? I mean, it's not a goal like, let's hit our quarter, let's like run the extra mile in order to hit our quarter. No, I mean, and that's not even the reason why I'm pushing myself when I'm out there trying to bring my mile down by another minute, It isn't even about that goal, is it? I mean, it is about this bigger thing I'm trying to do, is trying to be my best whoever. And that's how purpose is woven into the adversity ahead of us and perhaps into the journey ahead of us. I mean, that's the way to think about it.
Well, that's exactly right. And I love your example. The idea of a certain number on your speed, or the number that indicates miles traveled over a period of time, it's meaningless. It's meaningless except as a way to track, which is really what the goal is, to track this progress towards something that genuinely matters to you. And the truth is, not only is the purpose the magnet that draws you forward, when you throw in things that aren't purpose-driven, it can confound it. You look back a million years ago in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a researcher named Amol, and she was looking particularly at what spurs creative behavior. So think about it. I'm taking a bet. I don't know that this will pay off. There's risk and uncertainty. So it begins to overlap here. She found that when you try to give extrinsic rewards for that kind of uncertainty and risk behavior, the behavior actually goes down, doesn't go up. And, it's very, very interesting. Let me give you an example from your running. If, in fact, there was some extrinsic reward, even one I identified with you that was really meaningful to you as an extrinsic reward, if I went and I began to say, Amol, I want you to push yourself to run better. And the way we'll do that is if you run within a certain standard of excellence, meaning over a certain bar of performance, and you and I or you predict it. So you tell me your goal to run, you're going to go out and run, and if you hit it, here's $1,000, whatever's meaningful to you. What will happen over time is you'll begin to try to negotiate with me and drive that performance expectation down further and further. You'll try to manage my expectations. Now, you'll come up with great stories and you'll have great explanations. But do you see, you'll try to hedge your bet. You'll begin to play this game in the range of the extrinsic motivation And in fact, the performance you want to see, the behavior you want to see will subside. It won't improve it. Your time won't get better and better. Your goals will get safer and safer.
Yeah, I mean, you see that all the time. I mean, whatever. Sales teams, personal performance, all the extenuating circumstances. We got to change the bar. There are so many nice stories like that. So purpose matters. And I guess the other theme here to explore as we enlarge purpose a little bit is how many commonalities there are between us. It's not like you got to go do some kind of mind reading on some member of your team and figure out, oh yeah, there's like some Proustian story about them and the Madeleine, and now that's the purpose. No, they're much bigger. They're really big human kind of directions, right? I mean, a little bit of work with your people, you start finding these huge vectors, and they're kind of infinite and cosmic, and you'll always be searching for them, unlike the 8-minute or the 7-minute or the 6-minute mile.
Well, I think you're exactly right. And I think what I'm hearing you say, and I agree with, is you don't have to go that deep. The truth, but you've got to go through the exercise that says we've got to name and own what matters. I do an exercise with executives sometimes in this idea of, then let's really come up with a vision or a mission that is not just a Dilbert-style wordsmith document that gets posted on a conference
serve our customers
wall,
with unparalleled efficiency for maximum profits for shareholders.
Which, by the way, I hope everybody within the sound of my voice knows that the employees are rolling their eyes at that.
Yeah.
Our employees are more sophisticated than we give ourselves credit for. One of the exercises I do, though, is an illustration where I simply draw a number of overlapping circles. Think, 3 or 4 circles in a kind of Venn diagram. And I say, that area of overlap where all these circles do, there's the common purpose. And it makes them so nervous a lot of times. What if there's no overlap? What if there's no overlap? The truth is, if we're all there at the company, if we're already all there, signed up for the cause, we're getting something out of it, and there's got to be something that is common to it. So the truth is, you don't have to go very deep, and that is what you've got to tap into, because that personal meaning, that purpose is what will drive and sustain.
To an extent, I mean, this passage, for those who've been listening of this last 10 minutes, if you had heard this a year ago or 5 years ago, it would have sounded like leadership gobbledygook. If you are hearing this now and you think about the uprisings in the streets, income inequality, the imperative on racial justice, and you think your company and your people ever cared about anything, and you're wondering what the purpose might be, I mean, it is just right there, right in front of you. In the past, when I saw companies set themselves up with some kind of, social benefit sort of thing, almost every single one that I have seen felt like just a bolt on. Like, I care about climate, so I'm going to start a company that makes eyeglasses or something. And they just feel, I just couldn't understand how they mesh. It's fine if your eyeglass company wants to work on climate, no problem. But the coherence of those ideas, I just had deep doubts about social enterprise generally. But that's because I was looking at things to see how they meshed, not because one thing got you somewhere else. And if the purpose is about social justice, and it always has been, and why would you ever have worked on a different topic? But the only way to get there is through this thing. I mean, this is a very clarifying moment these last few months.
I think so, and I think that I agree with you, that a lot of times it felt, well, the kind way to say is it felt like a bolt-on, right? Like, well, oh, and by the way, we care about humanity. In a more sinister interpretation, it felt a little manipulative. That
we don't care about humanity.
Right.
We want to take money from you. Yeah.
It's like, come on, you're almost suspicious that they would say it and not do it, right? If they'd say it and not do it, then there's clearly an attempt to at least emotionally defraud us. So, but now there's, this is going to sound horrible. Okay, so my first counsel also is, if you're practicing vague optimism, you're uninspiring people and they're doubting your leadership. That being said, I'll sound vague optimistic here. There are a couple of good things that have come out of this. the crisis of 2020 that our grandchildren will all remind us of. And one of the things is you can now begin to see the overlap, the actual integration between all of us as a human race. I mean, we're catching each other's bugs, right? The fact that, I mean, and it's the flashpoint around social injustice. Listen, the impact of COVID was significantly more detrimental among disenfranchised communities long before George Floyd became the flashpoint for these long-standing social injustices. We begin to see that all of these things are interrelated, and that however we're going to operate as a business, it operates within that context. So it is our business.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for leaders, a powerful moment. I think that is one of the great rewards. I think ignoring the US president or the prime minister in the UK is worthwhile. There are some small lessons from how foolish they have been, but I think the biggest lesson is here on purpose. And we've changed our company, and I'm not going to go into it, but it was always there in the background in the stuff we were doing. We thought we were doing what we do for good reasons, but now it's overdue. The bar is higher. It should be right there in front. It should be clear that we're working towards some real goals, not just trying to get them for free by conducting ourselves well. I want to turn for the next few minutes to how to solve the problem. Okay, so we have whether the special type of adaptive problem of a crisis or a bigger adaptive problem. I mean, as leaders, those are the only problems you should be spending your time on, probably. If it is a technical problem that someone can go solve, hire the surgeon, send them in. Hopefully your people have that capacity. And if you're in there working on the spreadsheet, then you have a more difficult situation than you might realize. But the adaptive problems are these ones that require change of yourself and the environment around you to come up with some new way of seeing it and doing it, right? And you got to show up, you got to be the leader, you have to have the trust of your people. That's some of the stuff that we've been talking about, and provide some kind of environment where there is a purpose and that encouragement, but also some safety so people can do their work. Okay, but now you've got a problem that you got to solve. What then? Take the pen, get to the whiteboard, sketch it out, send it around to all.
Well, yes, but let me back you up just a little bit, because the raw resources for this are pretty important. And I would say one is your people. People aren't generic. There are people who are going to be more valuable to you in terms of their skill set and their perspective. So let's assume you've solved the challenge of what really is the way we're going to try and compete and win. And by the way, this is the caliber of the type of person. Now, I'm always frightened when I say that people will think there's some kind of a Stepford Wives, there's a one tight way to be, what employee fits at Notel, and it in fact narrows the ability to have people bring their individual strength and fly the flag. That's not the case. When you think about who are the people you want at the whiteboard with you, who are the people who are going to be uniquely qualified to find the solutions Notel needs, and what is that skill set? That skill set might be they're willing to challenge the status quo. That could be a very specific skill set these days when the old rules are being broken and the new rules aren't written. The way that somebody might challenge the status quo doesn't limit your diversity at all, though. We all come from different origins, different perspectives. But our willingness not to be stuck in tradition or accept things at face value is still critical. So you've got to have the right people in the room. Now let's assume you've been clear about the way you're trying to compete and you have these brilliant people. That's an important raw resource.
Well, I mean, sorry, just to adjust a tiny bit, the right people in the room, okay, you're lucky that you do, but you usually won't. I mean, everyone's in a different situation with people. You can't hope for if you have the ideal group, you can do anything. Rather, an understanding of who you've got, how they operate before posing the problem to them, right? I mean, perhaps.
Well, I like it that way. I mean, I was leaving it implied, but probably too much so, implies the leader's ability to read and know where their people are at if you're going to make this assessment of their their unique ability to contribute. But it's going to be imperfect, and being aware of where they're at and where they're likely to come from is as important or more important than them being perfectly fit. Well, and quite honestly, the other raw resource is your understanding of the leadership role and your leadership quality, and that's going to be imperfect too. But fundamentally, you have to bring a basic understanding of your role as leader. We've touched on this. You're in big trouble if you think that you're going to have the right answer and chart a solution. In fact, you'll merely limit perspectives and you'll increase your likelihood of failure. But
so it's not take the pen. I mean, it's you got to understand who your colleagues are in this. So it doesn't start with, okay, guys, here's the first draft. Now please make it better. Perhaps it starts the opposite way. We are faced with a great difficulty here, but I don't think I'm going to be able to figure this out. I need your help.
Absolutely. I think that you're going to be in a much more powerful position as a leader if you understand your job is to enable and support the group, the team coming together with clarity and conviction.
But can you be charged then with simply abdicating the responsibility? Like, hey, what the hell? You've just given us an impossible problem. We have an hour to figure it out, or a day, or whatever. And you're not even in the room, and you're just saying, hit send on this thing when you're done. Are you crazy? You want me to put my neck out on the line on this thing?
Well, I think that if it was in practice that extreme of an example, it would be a kind of abdication. Amol, I want you in the room, but I want you in the room again as a guardian or purveyor of a robust process. And here's the way you might be in the room. You might be in the room and you might recognize that this person who has this keen insight into X, Y, or Z who's also profoundly introverted and not contributing. So think about support through good meeting hygiene as a meeting manager and drawing that out. So you'll become an organizing framework of we've got to solve this together. And if there are pieces of your expertise that can help frame or create a parameter, you certainly want to provide that. But you need to understand that your role is to resist every temptation to tell them that you, with certainty and clairvoyance, chart a path to the future. One thing is, they're not going to believe you, okay? And you lose credibility. The other thing is you raise in their mind, then why do we even need to be in the room? Why do we need to contribute? Is this some kind of a manipulative attempt to have us buy in because you're pretending like we own the process?
Yeah. I guess you are still invited there as leader to provide some adjustments, amplifications, challenges even, but you just can't drive.
You can't drive. As a matter of fact, I would say you're absolutely invited. You're essential to be in the room, but you better understand what the job of the leader is, as opposed to the purveyor of the right answer. Those
right.
days
You're not the
over.
oracle. You're not the, yeah. And I guess the language from Heifetz, just because we keep going back to him, is let the people do the work.
Yeah, as a matter of fact.
Provide them with your support and resources, but if they don't figure it out, they won't be able to carry it out.
As a matter of fact, he would say that's preeminent, that making sure that you, push is too strong of a word, but that you continue to lay on them that they have the resources to solve this problem. Not one.
But are you just equals in the room? I think there was a nice comment just now, and I've struggled with this sometimes. You sort of show up and pretend, hey, we're all just equals here. Maybe it doesn't work. They don't believe you. That's as dishonest. You're still the CEO or whatever, right? And then on the other hand, like if you pull it off and you just disappear into peerness of the group, but it's heading in the wrong direction, like you do need to do something, right?
Well, I think you might do a lot of things. What you won't do, though, is rely on your symbolic or hierarchical authority.
I see.
Right?
Like,
so I may
guys,
say,
enough, we're done. Blah,
yeah,
blah, blah. Good job.
We originally said it's this, and now we're off track. It's a matter of concern and logic, right? It matters to me, and I can see it. That's different than me saying,
right,
look,
right. Like as
a
great member of any team, and at this point, if you're the leader, presumably you've been effective in some teams. If you are a wonderful member of a team, you have many resources at your disposal to try to bring it, adjust it, move it, say, hey, are we still carrying out the thing we had set as our assumptions here? Whatever. You're there to adjust a bit, right? Or provide some example. You don't need to just swing axes, send people out of the room. You probably don't need to. You have a lot of informal authority sitting there. I mean, you have a lot of formal authority too. A gentle move or two ought to work.
Yeah, I would say that there's nobody in that room who's forgotten that you're the CEO. So in fact, what you want to do is make your touch softer, make your words lighter. I guarantee you that they're landing heavier than what you think because people are aware of it. And the degree to which you contain that, though, will actually garner respect, not people wonder why you abdicated. Because remember, you're there shoulder to shoulder contributing.
Yeah, but you got to be there, I suppose. You know, Rich, part of our theory on offering this conversation to our friends and colleagues in the world around outside Notel is that we mostly talk to them about the workplace and how we can help them make that place better to support their people. But we never really talk to them directly about what they, as leaders of their organizations, can do to be more effective in supporting their people. And we sit and watch them. I mean, we're there, and we deal with a lot of the same stuff, you know, as we've been growing and spreading around the world. And, you know, we have so much of your wisdom and the experience of some of our colleagues. And so I guess my hope on this conversation was to share with a bunch of folks some ideas. And I'm asking you all now who are listening, if this was valuable for you, and if we ought to do it again, and do more. So I'm asking you, and I think the only way I'm going to know is if you tell me. So you got to write to me, amol@notel.com, AMOL at KNOTEL.com, because I think that's the purpose that really drove me and Rich in this business. I mean, we didn't start the business to whatever, run a bunch of buildings or put up a bunch of revenue numbers. We really wanted to build a business that would go out and reach a lot of folks and make people's working lives better, make the folks in that industry work. Just that was the goal. And I think this is just one of those ways, I hope. And if the answer is yes, write to me and we'll be back in touch with you soon. Right, Rich? We're excited for this.
Absolutely. I'm delighted that the conversation has come to the forefront, and whatever we can do to share whatever haltingly wise the information is as we go forward, we'd be glad to share.
Cool. Wonderful, Rich. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.